got to know yourself so that when you meet someone who's different from you, or if you're in a training or if you're in a work setting, you have this sense of like people do things differently and it's usually okay. Versus if I see difference as a threat, my reaction is going to be very different than curiosity of like, oh, you're doing things differently.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Turning In podcast. Long-awaited episode today. Amy and I speak with Fatimah Finney. We speak a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion, intercultural competence, how these things intersect with internal family systems. To be honest, I learned a lot speaking with Fatimah for this hour. I hope that you guys enjoy it. I hope that you learn a lot and or brush up on previous knowledge that you may have had on the topics. It was really, she's just such a graceful person to be around and to spend time with, and is so well spoken and eloquent about, powerful topics like these. So I hope that you enjoy, and we will go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Turning In podcast. Today, super exciting episode. We have Amy Crawford, as usual, and Fatimah Finney. Fatimah, welcome to the Turning In podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's been a long time coming. We've tried to schedule with Fatimah for months and months, and so this is just really exciting to have you on. Really quick before we get into sort of the general episode and topics of discussion, Fatimah, you are a level 3 certified therapist, assistant trainer, and clinical consultant through the IFS Institute. And then you have a private practice where you hold group workshops, you do consulting, usually with the specialty of intercultural competency. So with all of that, we're kind of excited when we reached out, our listeners, we were sort of talking pre-show. Our listeners and sort of the model of IFS as a whole is kind of all about relationships internally and externally. And so having the conversation about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, intercultural competency, and how all of that can relate just in the general world as well as through the lens of IFS is sort of the bones of the episode, and we're excited to dive into whatever else comes up. So welcome again.
Thank you.
First, would you mind kind of obviously in your own words, defining for us and for our listeners your conceptualization of DEI and like inclusion especially, but sort of what that means and what that is for you and your own experience and expertise?
Yeah, so this conversation is happening at an interesting time in the US where I am, just in case you all have a global audience, where the term DEI has been politicized. We see that in certain parts of the country. It's being banned, focusing on this thing called DEI. And so depending on who says it or how it's being used, it makes sense to me that the audience would be like, what is this thing? Like, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it not?
Right.
So, DEI is an acronym to begin with. It's the D is for diversity, E is for equity, usually in most spaces, and the I is for inclusion. And in my experience, there has been a lot of different ways to kind of say what I think the essence is, how to make sure that people are seen, heard, and valued. So you may hear DEI, you may hear DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. You may hear ready, RE, racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then there's ones that add an A for access. And I think all of those, whatever combination of alphabets you hear, the essence is a focus on how do we make sure that the people who are present are being seen, heard, and valued. And I do think that that parallels with what you said around IFS is about how do we make sure that what's going on inside, we're aware of what's going on inside, we're listening to the needs of what's going on inside. And DEI is about, particularly in work settings, in a lot of workspaces, how to make sure that in a place where a lot of people with a lot of different lived experiences, backgrounds, when you come together for a common goal of whatever the work goal is to, make donuts, how do we make sure that the people at the donut shop are being valued, that their skills are being leveraged, and that they're not being excluded or isolated, or that people are getting preferential treatment based off of things that are systemically and institutionally not fair to do. So for listeners who are like, what is this thing? Diversity, equity, inclusion is really about how do we bring people together? And when they are together, how do we make sure that we're not perpetuating racist, sexist, all the systems of oppression that have been repeated in our country, and making sure that people who are investing their time to come do a job aren't being subjugated to discrimination, unfair wages, not being valued for the time or not being equally valued when we talk about like pay gaps. So DEI usually looks at how to a range of different things. So like making sure that people aren't being discriminated. Federally, there are like 9 categories, I believe like 8 or 9 categories, like race, age, religion, all of these things that people can't be discriminated against. And inclusion says even beyond that, how do we make sure that people aren't just in the room, right? We didn't just count numbers and say, hey, you got a Black woman on staff now, or hey, you got somebody from this group, so we're good. It's about what are the actual experiences of the people while they're there, right? Because I'm sure all of us can come up with examples of how we were invited into a place, but the actual experience of being there really sucked, either because people did not, they were rude to us, or they completely, ignored us once we got there, or we noticed that other people got these things and I didn't get any of those things, even though I may have paid the same money or even though I have the same job description, right? And so when DI is focused on it really looks at what are the experiences of the people who are here investing their time and energy, their skills to benefit an organization, to bring in profit for an organization. What are their actual experiences and how are we making sure that everyone has an equitable experience? I think equity is really important because we all are different and we have different needs. And so equality doesn't always work because what I need may not be what you need, right? I think about a simple example of how sometimes organizations, they want to give, they want to be nice. And so they want to give a perk. And so they'll give everyone Starbucks cards. And like, that's great if you like Starbucks, right? But really trying to think about, okay, if we want people to actually feel like this gift is beneficial for them, the people who like a Starbucks gift card will be satisfied. Those who do not or prefer another organization's gift card or something else would kind of be like, so it's nice, but now I have to regift it, or now I have to like find a way to kind of get rid of this. So it's really thinking about what does equity look like, whether it's giving gifts or rewards, but even like, what does it look like in terms of scheduling, right? The pandemic brought on remote work versus working in person, right? If the same job can get done, does everyone have to come into the office to do it? And really thinking about that versus this is what we've always done. What we've always done probably served a few people, but now when you have people in your organization with different needs, you have to think about, are you really prioritizing everyone? Or are you trying to get everyone to kind of conform to a standard that does not match them? And so when I operate into cultural competence, it's really thinking about what is your actual goal as maybe a leader, CEO, right? What are you actually trying to do? are you actually ready to do the thing that you think you're ready to do? Because sometimes there's a mismatch. People really mean well. It's the trend to want to do this, but they haven't worked with their parts that actually are like, oh, well, the way things have been really benefited me. So I have parts that really fear changing anything because what's going to happen to me? And, you know, the status quo is how I got to this position that I'm in. And so working with parts around, the dissonance of change, scarcity. Sometimes a lot of people think if something changes or if this group gets something, there may not be enough for me. So there's a lot that's attached to DEI. But when I try to simplify, I'm like, the essence is how to make sure that people are seen, heard, and valued for what they're investing in a given situation. And everybody, not just the people that people like the most or the people who have the most important job. And sometimes in organizations, there's hierarchy. These positions matter more than these over here. But really looking at the humanity in people and having a sense of integrity of you're a human being. You deserve to be respected. You deserve to be cared for and considered in the same way, regardless of title, regardless of rank. And that's really hard because culturally we say, no, certain people get better things. You're a CEO, you deserve to get better treated than the person
Right.
coming in, right? So a lot of it is like unlearning some cultural ideas and beliefs around work, professionalism, capitalism, who gets what and who deserves
Mm-hmm.
what do we as human beings deserve just by way of our existence.
Yeah.
That's
And
positive.
what's coming in real strongly for me, Fatima, is, yeah, like you said, unlearning the isms, if you will, that have been so handed down ancestrally, culturally, societally, all of the things. And I'm wondering how does someone begin to unlearn those? Obviously, my guess is there's going to be lots of microaggressions, macroaggressions, really, acts of exclusion along the way, which I don't condone, obviously. And as we unlearn, again, let's call them legacy burdens. I think a lot of times they can be legacy burdens. As we unlearn some of this, yeah, how would you encourage someone to begin unlearning some of these things that parts of us have carried?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I usually invite people to really think about themselves as a cultural being because it all starts with culture. And oftentimes I work with people who are surprised to think like, oh, I have a culture because historically culture was for other people, right? So people who have culture, especially for the dominant, uh, well, I'll stick with race for now. So dominant white people in the US, culture was like
Yeah.
what people who weren't white, right? If you wanted a cultural experience, you went and did something or you saw something that
Yeah,
was
you,
with
you went
other.
to the Filipino fair on the
There
weekend.
you go.
Right.
Exactly. Right. And
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
to look at yourself as culture is essentially how we do things. So really getting clear on how you do things, how you have done things, how you were brought up to do things. Um, when I work with in my consultation, I have people really think about, and it's interesting because recently came from a funeral or what we would call a janaza, and so I have people think about like when someone dies, what do you do? And they'll tell me, oh, if someone dies, you do this, this, this. You got to do this with the family, okay. And like when someone has a baby, what do you do? Right? Oh, you do this, and people are like, this is the thing you do. But
Right.
in reality, what Megan might do may look even different from what Amy
Mm-hmm.
might do, which may look
Mm-hmm.
different from me. And those are all cultural practices that we tend to think this is just what you do. But as you come in contact with people with different cultural experiences, that's when you start to realize, oh, hold on, they're not doing the thing or they're doing something
Yeah.
different. And depending on where we are in our own capacity to engage differences, we may automatically judge that. They're doing that wrong. That's not the way to do the thing versus, oh, well, I have my way and that's a way to do it. And so I encourage people to really think about like, do you even understand your way of doing life? Because that switch from what I do is a way versus the way can be really transformative for people.
Yeah.
But it also can activate parts because we want to be right. And
Mm.
so my way, I need that to be the right way, because if it's not, then what am I doing? Right?
And it feels scary, right? Like it feels super scary. Yeah.
Because we also have a cultural being right is one of the things. Like, you always want to be right. So that's why we argue. That's why we defend. That's why we want to do debates, because there's something about being right in our culture. There's also something about making sure that like right and wrong, wanting to like wrong, right, needs to be denigrated. It needs to be shamed. Like, it's not even just like, oh, all right, that's right and wrong. Like, there's something to be done about wrong, right? If I'm met with wrong, it's not just like, oh, that's wrong. It's like, we need to do something about this. So we need to shame. People get really polarized around what's right, what's wrong. And I think that when people are like, well, how do I stop all of this? It's like, you got to know yourself, so that when you meet someone who's different from you, or if you're in a training, or if you're in a work setting, you have this sense of like, people do things differently and it's usually okay. Versus if I see difference as a threat, my reaction is going to be very different than curiosity of like, oh, you're doing things differently. Oh, when people die, we have a ritual of like 7 days, you don't do this, or you wear this, all of this. Oh, we do things differently, versus like, you're completely disrespectful.
Right.
The fact that you don't do this, or we need to stay away from them because they do things differently. Because again, everyone can be seen, heard, and valued. That's the pathway to actually connection and understanding, right? We can't get to the, oh, why do you do it that way, if we're already cutting it out. Like, there's no value there. I don't even need to know the why behind it. There's no value. There's nothing that I can kind of get from there. And so people thinking about, what are my cultural practices? What is my culture? And sometimes that's looking at what has shaped you. Like, for example, much of me is shaped by my existence as a African-American woman, racialized as Black in the United States, a Muslim woman, and just being a woman, just those three, Black, Muslim, woman, like that is something that really shapes the way I walk, the way I see the world. I'm often the only at that intersection in a lot of places that I'm in. And so really looking at what has shaped my experiences. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's my, I'm Irish Catholic, I'm from South, I did a lot of work in Boston. So like, I'm Irish Catholic, South Boston, I've never really traveled a lot. Like, there's this culture, just being in a geographic region can really shape how you see the things that you do. Here in the Northeast, there's a certain way that we are that's maybe quite different than in the South, right? And so those are things that shape what you do and what you don't do. Personal space. When you meet someone, are you like, hey, how you doing? And I want to have a conversation, or are you kind of like, what are you doing when you're in my face? Like, what are you doing? Right? Knowing that those things are again, a way versus the way. And as people start to think of like, oh, yes, that makes so much sense, because when I got to this place, when I went off to college, I felt so out of place, or I felt so this, is usually because there's a cultural clash. Go into a place where you see a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And so when people start to have the opening of like, okay, what is my cultural practice? There's other people who have other cultural practices, and most of it is usually okay without consequence. That's a profound shift for people. So I would say, if you want to, before you can unlearn some of this stuff, you actually have to see what it is that's within you. You have to see what your parts have already absorbed that feels like, this is how I do things, to then get curious of, okay, well, I've actually absorbed that certain people with certain skin colors I should be afraid of. Before talking to them, before doing anything, I've learned, I sometimes been directly taught, stay away from those people. So if I can say that is a part of the culture that I've been in, then I can make a decision about it, because every culture has things that serve people and have things that don't serve them at a certain point, have things that are harmful and have things that are beneficial, right? Simply because a culture belongs to somebody, it's not like everything is great about this because it's yours and what you grew up. And we all can probably think about things that we grew up with in our families that we're like, now, like, yeah, Not going to do that. Not going to do that with my kids. And you can also say like, oh, I cannot wait to do this thing that we used to do. Right. And so it's both of those. But that's a big leap sometimes for people, again, because if you want to be right, you want to be good. So you may have parts that want to say, no, not me. That's not me. Right. Or it is me over here. Like, it is my family, but I'm different. Right. Somehow I'm a different one. Or it is my family group or my hometown, but I want to be different. And it's sitting with those parts of like, what's the concern about being the same as them? What do I think may come up? What am I afraid of if I say, yeah, I'm just like my uncle in some ways? Like I have that same feeling, or I get the same reaction. IFS gives the opportunity of, how do I get curious about that? How does this actually make sense given where I've been? Because what I tell my clients is like, where we are right now in 2023 makes sense when we actually looked at where we've been up until then. And so cultural values, the way that you see people who are like you, the way that you see people who are different from you, if you can sit with it, it probably all makes sense how this happened. Question is what you want to do about it.
Right.
Because if you are in this space now of like, I do want to be, anti-racist, I don't want to be committing microaggressions, then I talk with people, all right, well, here's some things that you're going to need to do if that's where you're headed. We also have to hold that we all exist in a world with people who have different goals. There's some people who are not motivated at all to do anything, and they have a right to that, because we can't then polarize with them of like, you should be doing blah, 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 because we know what happens with people who are forced or shamed to do anything. They usually dig a little bit deeper. But if we can kind of say, all right, you have your way of being, I have a different way, or I think things should be done differently, right? I do think that this country has been, this country has a long history of prioritizing one group over others, and I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to be a part of my legacy. So here's what I'm going to do with that. It's kind of moving in that, right? I'm doing what I need to do based on where I am and what my goals are. And I can respect that you're going to move differently in the world. And that's really,
that's hard for me. That activist part of me. Oh,
yes, that is extremely hard. And what I found in doing this DEI work is that, especially with IFS, which has been really helpful, is that a lot of it can be very parts led. A lot of it can be very agenda based, right? If my activism says that other people don't get to be here as they are and have the agency to make choices about when they're ready to change, then my activism is actually self-serving and it's about power dominance.
Right.
Versus truly kind of trying to, that respecting the human being, even in their the challenges, even in the ugliness, even in the most visceral, because there's a lot of very disgusting things that are happening in the country. And with IFS and even spiritual practice, what we know is that parts activate more parts. Like what I say, like parts be part. If you come in with your parts, it's just going to create more of a parts party. But there's an integrity of like, you know what, I see you and I can end this conversation, right? I can see you and your humanity, what you choose to do. I can end this conversation. I can even end this relationship while letting you know that the door is open if and when we have these conditions. And I think that's the difference. People feel like, no, I need you to be this other thing right here and right now. And I'm going to fight you until you do it because I'm right. But if both people are feeling like I'm right, we just kind of get the same things over and over. I'll pause here. I've talked
I thank you for talking a lot, because in the last 22 minutes and 21 seconds, I have learned so much already. Like truly, Fatimah, it's such wisdom that you're speaking. The question that's coming up for me, what do you think? So we've defined that we can, in a boundaried, self-led way, coexist with one another as long as we're in self and looking at ourselves. But what do you think those parts are protecting from? Because we've learned that we have all of these parts, right? These protective parts, managers, firefighters, protecting from them. You've mentioned the word shame a few different times. So like on either side of the legacy burden, like, do you think that it's shame that I'm not going to get this piece of pie that's like supposed to be mine? Is that what, some of these microaggressions or macroaggressions are coming down to, do you think? Or as we get into like a personal introspective place, where I'm being aggressive towards another race, ethnicity, ability, sex, gender, whatever, is that part of me, trying to make myself right because it's scared that if I'm wrong, what do I do with that? I don't know if that fully makes sense, my question, but what would you say the most common thing, if we boil it down to, is it a legacy burden and a cultural learning, and us being quote unquote stuck in our ways, or is it something that we really can look at and move past and have openness with through, IFS or any other modality?
Yeah. So I'll start with the microaggressions piece. The way that I think about that is microaggressions are really these reminders of the beliefs that we've all absorbed, right? They come out in these ways in what people say or what people do. And so microaggressions, in short, they're these behaviors or these statements that can either be directly or indirectly perpetuating a belief about someone that is rooted in a stereotype. So sometimes, you can feel a person's intent. They're trying to say something nice, but their way of connecting with a person is influenced by the history by which they were left to believe about a person. So I'll take myself for an example, where I have, people, a woman who comes up to me and says, oh, I'm so sorry you have to wear that thing, talking about the scarf that I wear around my head for faith. And so on the one hand, her saying that can be that it shows that whatever she thinks about me wearing this, that there's something that she thinks I'm experiencing, but she wants to express a sense of, I feel something for you. But the feeling that she's feeling is rooted in misinterpretations, probably, about what me wearing this actually means. So these moments of these microaggression moments of connecting, sometimes they become these wild kind of like blow up moments, because that person probably came thinking that she was doing something nice. She was trying to make a connection. She wanted to talk about me more. But what she did is that she assumed my experience before asking about it, based on whatever she absorbed about Muslim women, whether she absorbed about Black women, like whatever her history coming and saying that statement, it automatically erases my experience and says what she knows about me is true. And there's a thread of she's probably trying to make a connection. But me on the receiving end, less likely to want to connect with this person because they've already decided something about me. And so that's why I think microaggressions can get really confusing, and where shame can come up, because depending on my reaction to it, so say, I like shrugged off or rolled my eyes, that would land for her of like, what? Like, why is this person being rude? Or like, all of these things. And that can kind of bring up shame. Or even if I say like, what you said to me feels really rude, or I don't know what you mean by you say that. Like, we that need to be right in our culture, or need to be good, or need to be liked, especially, sends people into a frenzy. It activates something, right? So I was trying to do something nice, maybe, and this person's reaction is not what I was expecting, or worse, they're telling me that I actually hurt them, or I actually did something to that's off-putting. That activates stuff. Either people start to get defensive, no, you didn't hear what I said, or I was just trying to be nice, or, oh my God, people get terrified. People's exiles get activated of like, I'm not good because look what I did to this person. And so what I think IFS can be helpful with is if people can work with just that one single part of needing to be liked, or like that comes up a lot, or needing to be right, then people can kind of be with, okay, one, I've said this thing. I did say this thing to this person. Now I'm hearing their experience of it. can I take that in, right? Can I take, even if the parts can't, how can I get grounded and be a little bit more sort of self-led so that I can then do a repair? I apologize for saying that. You know what? I do realize that I probably should have asked you, your name. I probably should have, this was coming from a part that really wanted to connect. And I ran in with this thing that I know about Muslims, and I just wanted to kind of connect with that. Because I say, okay, sit with the feeling and the intention first before opening your mouth to say anything. What do you want to do in this moment? Oh, I really want to connect with her. And then think about what are some options. Maybe I can go ask her name. Simple. Before needing to go and show that you know things about Muslims or all of these things, it's really slowing it down, right? What's being activated in me when I see someone and I want to get to know? Is it fear? Because I would say since the murder of George Floyd, particularly with white people that I work with, there's been like this lot of angst of like, I gotta like figure this out. Like there's been this identity crisis and awakening of like, what I have all my life, and particularly white women, all my life I've been taught to be nice, and I've been working really, really hard to be nice. And now I'm being told that I'm doing things that are so far away from being nice that it just like almost paralyzes people. That you see them go into absolute denial of it. No, that's not me. And they dig in their heels and they actually kind of just like defend against it. Or the other side I've seen is that people kind of really crumble and they lose their own integrity and nothing is good about them. Nothing is good about them. Nothing is good about any white people that they know in their family, and only the goodness is in people of color, right? And none of those are great for anybody. It's not great for them. It's not great for people of color to have white people kind of collapse in that way. And so it's really like, okay, how can we all get back to the sense of like every human being was created with the capacity to connect. We are wired for connection, and we can figure this out if we just slow things down and do a lot of personal work. A lot of people can really benefit from therapy and doing the personal work in a safe place where they can say the thing out loud without judgment, without like say the thing like, yes, I do hold these ideas. Yes, because for me, I'm like, how can we not? Like literally growing up in this society, growing up in the US, it's literally the air that we swim in. Racism is like literally it. Everyone comes out unstained, right? And so can we look at that though? Because it doesn't feel good. Racism is a bad word. We don't want to be associated with bad things. But if you're trying to create the world that you want, you have to be honest with yourself.
Well, I want to talk about that a little bit because IFS was actually, so I watched Amy run a group, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, starting to teach, clients about IFS. And I was just being introduced to it as well through her. And it was the first time out of a, at that point, 8-year long space in the, mental health space that it was brought up of like, let's identify some of these parts. And she gave people, I don't know exactly the exercise, Amy, so sorry if I'm butchering it, but she literally gave people a multi-page long list to go through. And there were like, it was like circle parts that you identify with no matter what it is. And there was racism on there. There was, your racist part, your whatever part. And it was the first time.
Homophobic parts. Yeah, all those scary parts that none of us want to talk about.
Yeah. And it was the first time in the mental health space within the topic of IFS that was being opened up for conversation. And you brought up George Floyd. I think that obviously was a massive event that took place, somewhat recently and has been happening for long times, but was really politicized and in the media. And it kind of like ruptured and opened up this conversation for everybody. And it is really, really charged because I think there is a lot of shame, being a white woman in super white America, Utah, right? Like there is shame of why I want to connect. I never want to hurt anyone, and realizing, oh my gosh, I've probably been hurting people in the effort to connect or in the effort to want to have relationship with others, I think that in itself is a really tough pill to swallow. You know, none of us want to be the beholders of a homophobic part or a racist part. I'm having, trouble coming up with others, other examples, or somebody that discriminates based on ability, etc. And that on its own is really tough. So taking that time to explore that, Fatimah, like you're saying, like it starts with us being able to sit with the uncomfortable truth, and then being able to really figure out what other millions of avenues can I use to connect that aren't just draped in all of these burdens or coming from an exile or coming from apart. Like, if I want to connect, let's connect through self type of thing. I don't know. I think that on its own is a really interesting conversation about how much shame and how difficult it is to kind of just hold that about ourselves, because like you said, we all have it. Like if we grew up, especially in America, our society is just the systemic racism. It's so deep, like how can you not absorb that?
Yeah. I also think that perfection gets in the way of a lot of things.
Yeah.
Parts that hold that, because to be honest, is inherently, right, it requires imperfections. And so we hold parts of like, I should only show this, which is perpetuated in our culture and work environments. Like certain spaces prioritizes certain parts, right? Work says, bring your parts that's going to get this job done. Everything else, you can leave that at home, right? Bring whatever is going to get this thing done. And so we're used to, oh, that's what I do at work. But, when you come home or when you're with certain people, you notice that different aspects of you show up. And so there's a priming for that. You do certain things in one place, you don't do it in the other. Introspection in the presence of others, there really isn't like the blueprint for that isn't one that's pretty solid, right? Like even going to therapy, when we think about the stigma of that historically, it was always something that was like, oh, you don't talk about it. If someone has mental health issues, like all of that really shouldn't be in the fore. That should kind of be, you keep that quiet. Your problems are private kind of thing. But what people oftentimes really need, and what we see in IFS trainings, is that when truth is spoken, the truth of an experience, there's healing in that, because it frees up all the energy of pretending that you got to do, all the layers and the veils you have to put over to be accepted. If it's like, no, just as you are, what's going on here? What parts are present? And the whole tagline of IFS, all parts are welcome. That's what kind of makes that pretty radical, because there's very few places where all parts of a person are welcome, right? Work says, bring your work self, get the job done. In certain families, right? People learn that, oh no, I can't even be everything here with my family because they only like this version of me, right? And so early on, people learn that all of you aren't welcome, right? We are conditioned. That's conditioned out of us. Like I believe that the human being is created into this space with everything, with this sense of you were created as you were. Every piece of you is needed, but our culture conditions us into something other than that. And so really thinking about what are the spaces where you can be honest. I oftentimes encourage people who do work with me of, you have to find community where you can land, because this work that you're trying to do to create a more equitable world is rough work. You're going to be knocked down from your own parts first often, right? The inner critic that says, oh, you're not doing it right? You're going to be knocked out from the inside and outside. A unique community, because a lot of wounds that we have, even when we think about trauma, right? The worst of it is when we're alone in it. But when we have good community, we can really get through and be able to do a lot of different things. Whether it's COVID exacerbated what was already there, there's still a lot of people who feel very, very isolated, who don't feel like they have community, or there's always a caveat. Oh, I have these friends, but I can't really tell them about this. Or I have this group over here, but I don't know if I can really do this. But to have it where it's like, I can bring anything. I can say the thing. I have these people who are like-hearted. That is something that I think anyone on this call who's like, I want to get better, you need community. IFS is great about helping you get to know yourself, but you need to kind of link that and connect that with other people. Otherwise, it's going to be easy to abandon. And so here we are in year 3 since the murder of George Floyd. And how many people we see it organizationally where they're like, oh, DEI didn't work, right? And they're shutting down their DEI departments. Everybody who's in, running all of the book clubs, they burnt out because it was parts led. I'm afraid I don't want to be like that group. So I'm going to read all of the books. I'm going to say all the things. I'm going to learn all the buzzwords so I can say it. But parts get tired. And then you go for the easier thing of just like, oh, I want to do something else. I'm so tired. It's hard to talk about all these different things. And so what I offer is how to do this work in a self-led way. It usually means really slowing down. It usually means turning in. See what I did there? Versus,
yeah, nice.
versus looking outward, right? I want to buy the books. I hear from all the other people like, ooh, what is happening to me after seeing a video of someone killed that way? Like, what is happening here first? Because I need to figure out what this is about, because there are parts in me that may never step on somebody's neck and kill them. But there may be parts in me that do feel like, that person I do believe maybe stole something over that one just by way of the color of their skin. So it's how do you sit with this and be honest? And if you can't do it, how do you connect with people who can help invite you in, right? How do you get yourself in a group with Amy, right? Who can help create the container for people to really lean into courage. And courage is that self-led quality that I think I often try to lead with and invite people in. Like self-leadership is courage. And it's like doing the thing that's hard. And one of the hardest things is to actually look at ourselves in the mirror. Human beings are so well versed in self-delusion. We can decide not to look at something, or if we see something, we have parts that will quickly come in and rationalize it, right? Oh yeah, I do feel that way, but I can quickly come in and try to rationalize. Like we are quick to not want to be
uncomfortable.
And us as therapists, we're educated, so we can come with the theories to support our ways of denying ourselves, right? But it's like, ooh, that's why I need an Amy to call, who's going to call that part out with love and say, no, not here. If you're really trying to do the work, that part's going to need to relax. That part's going to need to give you some space. Because if you get with other people who are rationalizing and, denying and doing all these different things, you're just going to kind of be cycling back and forth. You're going to keep making a mistake, going into shame, and you're just going to be back in a cycle. Mistake, shame, this all stuff is too hard. I don't want to do it again. But I don't want to leave the work that I'm doing. So now I'm just going to keep making mistakes, going into shame, cycling back and forth. But when you have that opening, which it sounds like you felt in that group, Meghan, it's like, oh, something could be different. There's a way that things can be different. And that's what parts really need to know. Is there a different way? Is there somebody else I can trust? Can I trust going to these groups with Amy for a little while until I can trust myself?
Well, yeah, I mean, being able to just have the conversation, right? Like that courage and curiosity that you're talking about, all of those self characteristics, or capital S self characteristics. I think that was what was really impactful in that initial, introduction, because IFS was the first modality that it was able to be the conversation, and everybody in the group, was able to kind of identify, oh, wow, this is true for me. And, oh, I did learn this and have been acting this way or that way. And it's just an open topic of discussion. And that's so needed. Is exactly what you're saying. Having safe people, that a community that all parts can actually be welcome, both internally and met externally with whoever those marbles in the jar people that you've found are, because we do have so many places that all parts aren't welcome, right? I've got my managers that are going to do this and that are going to run, like you said, the book club to learn and teach and et cetera, et cetera. And then when it gets too hard, I realize, I need a break, and it's too hard and it's too tough and it's been going on for too long and I'm not making the perfect difference, et cetera, as, to go along with your example. I just think it's such an important conversation. And one of the reasons I was really excited to have you on, because the conversation has kind of died out with the same extremity that, it once was. And I think it's got to be ongoing, because it does start with us, as individuals, and even being able to sit with the discomfort of whatever the truth may be.
Yeah. And when it's part led, they don't have the sustainability or endurance to keep going with whatever well intentions that our managers have of, I'm going to be that person who's going to fight the good fight. That's honorable and lovely, but it's not sustainable because it is coming from a part, and I do think that within IFS, that is the beauty of being able to identify the yucky sides of us that maybe that do carry shame, that I don't want to say, I have, because, I'm supposed to be woke, or I'm a therapist, so I shouldn't have any of those parts. But it's so much easier, in spite of the discomfort, to be able to say, a part of me feels this sometimes. A part of me is very aware if I'm walking down the street and there's a man, doesn't matter color, whomever, if I see a man, a part of me gets anxious and walks faster. Right?
Yep.
That's a part of me. That doesn't mean it's all me. But if we can't, as you're saying, Fatimah, and I'm summarizing your eloquent words in a way that is probably irrelevant, if we can't slow down and get curious about those parts of us and be honest with it, sadly, I think this really necessary work is futile. Then like you said, it's not going to go anywhere, and there's such a need for it, and I'm so grateful for people like you in this world, Fatimah, who are in it for the long haul, coming from a place of self to help bring awareness into this, and knowing we're going to screw it up. Let's call it what it is. We will put our, feet in our mouth. We'll make mistakes, microaggressions. What words of wisdom do you have, Fatimah, on repairing? How do we circle back? And I mean, you hinted at it with the scenario you gave of the woman speaking about your headscarf. But what words of wisdom do you give for making a repair?
What I encourage people to do is kind of like in sports, you need that practice. So when you're in the game, you're not doing something for the first time. It's getting to know your system, getting to know what comes up for you when it comes to being wrong or making a mistake, right? Really doing work with those parts and getting a sense of what do they believe about that? Oh, I'm terrible, I'm wrong, this person's never going to love me, I'm not going to have my needs met, or something terrible is going to happen if I make a mistake. Really getting to all of that, because essentially, right, to do repair well, you have to have both feet on the ground. And to know yourself that's what you kind of do. Okay, I know this happens to me, so that when someone comes and says, hey, you said this thing, or this is how this thing landed for me, you at least have a relationship with whatever's coming up, instead of whatever's coming out of your mouth and doing all kinds of stuff that makes the situation worse. So that's practice before getting in a situation. When you are in a situation, really slowing it down, really noticing. One of the things that I do encourage people to do is just feel yourself, feel, put your hand on here. This person is telling you this thing. And the first thing is to listen. So much of what we do is that we kind of respond to what we think we heard or what we think we know we're going to hear, as opposed to what the person is actually saying. So I've, take a moment and count to 25 before you say anything. Literally, don't just count to 25 before you say anything. And the first thing should be, I apologize. People get tripped up on this, right? Because no, I only apologize if I'm wrong. So I need to understand why this person thinks that I'm wrong or whatever the case may be. Whereas for me, I'm kind of like, whatever I did, even if I don't know what I did, it had this impact on this person. And usually it's my ego that will say, no, qualify. Only certain things get an apology. Whereas when I'm kind of separated from that, it's like, even if I don't understand it, like the fact that something that I did or said is creating a block in you from you being able to kind of just like be your free self, I can apologize for that. Like there's like I can just own that hey, like this thing happened and then I want to know more because then I can get information. Oftentimes I do. Oh, okay, yeah. What actually I said or this whole dynamic may sometimes actually may not even really be about me, but about parts that are projected and things like that. And I'm okay with that as well too. But the apology, when I know the impact of that, is it helps people relax. It helps people be acknowledged in their pain, regardless of where the source was. But I think if people get tripped up on like, I didn't do this thing or I didn't do this in this way, there's plenty of things that I've apologized for. And in me, I'm like, yeah, that was not about me, or that wasn't even not anything I said. Like if the world was recording that and we played it back, those weren't even the words, even if those are the words that they heard. But I think it's really working on our egos. What do we feel is happening? Usually repairs can feel like these battles that people need to win. And it's really like, how do we stay connected? What is it for me? It's like, what is it going to take for us to remain connected, especially if we have a relationship. So if you're on a training team, if you're working together, if you have a long-standing relationship, really thinking about what's going to be on the side of connection here versus being right? Like what's going to be effective for a relationship here versus not. Then others ask about, well, what if it's a stranger, right? Where there's no stake here, right? I can flip you off and be gone and let that be that. Then I like, well, think back to your own sense of your integrity. How do you want to walk in the world? Because that shouldn't change whether you have a connection with someone or whether they're a stranger. And so if there's, again, those differences, right? If it's like, oh, I'm a certain way with the people that I care about, or I know, but people on the street get a different version of me, or like sometimes I practice driving, right? People who are driving too slow might get a different version of me. You have to kind of work on those, right? How do I kind of get into this alignment where it's like any human being is going to get this version of me that's consistent, as consistent. And again, perfection will say I have to do that perfectly. But I invite people to think about being in this constant state of striving toward versus really achieve, because you can't be everything. You can't be that. We just can't as human beings. And can we have compassion for that versus feeling like, well, no, Fatimah just haven't cracked the code. I have to find a way where I'm going to be the exact same thing. And sometimes that's what people feel about self. And so I want to make space for that of like, no, you're not always going to be self-led. That will be out there more. Our parts can be a resource to us. But this idea of like, how do I be in self all the time? It's like, again, it's going to be
good luck.
Exactly. I would be honest about that and have compassion for that as just what is versus, well, that's a deficit. It just is what it is. It's not this deficit that now I have to make up for, overcompensate, because I'm not always going to be self-led. In repairs, you really want to make sure, like, how do I be connected to this person? How do I apologize? And then how do I go back to my people, that community, to process that, right? Because in short, I say impact speaks first in repairs, right? Where's impact? The impact speaks first.
Yeah.
Listen, and then they kind of decide what needs to happen here. Sometimes it's nothing. I just needed to say that. Sometimes it's the apology can be so helpful because culturally we don't do apology well. We victimize and make it all about the person. So it's just like revolutionary sometimes when somebody gets like a solid apology. Oh, this person isn't making it my fault. Oh, wow. Like, oh, they're not even talking and telling me how I shouldn't be feeling. Whoa. Just a good apology is transformative in our culture because we really suck at it. And so being able to do that, like repair, really going into how do I apologize? What are apologies that I felt that felt really good? How do I emulate that? And again, taking that pause, 25 seconds, asking I'm just sitting here. I really apologize. I want to know more. I want to hear more about this and what needs to happen here. Just getting that. can be really transformative for the person, but then also for yourself, because you're slowing down. You're not defending. You're not jumping in. You're not caretaking, which can also be awful. Of like, oh my God, how do I have to do this? You're not self-deprecating yourself, thinking that's going to make the other person feel good. Hint, it doesn't, because it just makes it all about you. So
Right.
you're just like, oh, let's slow it down. Then let's see what needs to happen. But more often than not, an apology needs to happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, it's just being human at the end of the day, like all of the everything, all the differences aside, being able to pause for that 25 seconds or however long you need, turning in and being able to actually continue to, I like just imagine this like ribbon or like, I don't know, ribbon of connection that is really what we're all hoping for. You started out the episode talking about how we really all just want to be heard, seen, and understood. And it's like, whether it's a stranger and the integrity that we have to have within ourselves, or like you said, a long-term relationship, if we're trying to interact with other people, the likelihood that we're trying to connect with them is really freaking high because we want to be seen, heard, and understood. It's really kind of simple at the end of the day. I don't know. That's kind of the bubble that I took out of that entire last part of the conversation. It's what we all want, what we all strive for. It's just like deep, meaningful connection in our lives, it feels like. Or I mean, I guess I can speak for myself, in my parts. I don't ever want to hurt anybody. I want, I want to connect and have community.
And the one thing I'll say about that too, so it is about connection, and it's about those with privilege practicing how to make space for others. So it's like, I want to connect, but it's also like myself as an able-bodied person, right? Being able to make space for those who are not, and knowing that most places were made for me. And so I have to be intentional about making space for others where the spaces weren't made for them, thinking about that, and not so much talking for them, but giving them a mic if I have access to. Because sometimes that way I have to be the voice for those people. And it's like, no, you don't. Or that community has a voice and is able to speak. The same thing for white people, making space for non-white people, noticing how many spaces were made for you all, how much was made for that, and how, am I taking up more space? Who's not being able to speak? If it's so comfortable for me, the space is probably made for me. So how do I think of people who are in here who are not like me and make space for them? Sometimes that looks like, I'm not going to speak into the space to give other people time to speak into the space. Or I'm going to bring people on a podcast from a different perspective to make sure that they have that there, because maybe there aren't any people on the podcast like that. So I also want to make sure that it's not kind of kumbaya. It's all we just got to connect, and that's what we want to do. People in privilege have work to do to make sure that we are aware of that privilege, aware of the power that comes with that, and that we are really leaning into that power for the betterment of those who have less of it, and not wasting it. Because sometimes people are just like, I don't like power. I just want to pretend like I don't have it, or I just want to be in solidarity with you. And it's like, people in power, we all need to be leaning into our power. And we have power in different ways, power with different demographic identities. But making sure that we're using it, because that's another blow to the work, is when people don't use the power that they have.
Right. And that goes back to that awareness piece, us getting really clear of where we do fall within the dimensions of power. Exactly. Right. And I identify as a white, heterosexual, female, able-bodied. I'm pretty darn close to the center of power. If I wasn't a female, I'd be there. Right. And so getting clear on that and having, I think you used the word, courage, having the courage to be able to go, this is where I do identify, and how does that impact the way in which I show up in the world, the way in which I see others, the way in which I inhabit space, like you said. I go into a meeting and it probably feels very natural for me. Well, I'm a big talker anyway, but to talk, take up some space. And that is not, like you said, everybody's right. I mean, it is their right, but that's not what they believe their right to be, because it's been robbed of them for so long, or their experience has made them believe that my voice isn't allowed here. And so, like you said, us in positions of power, handing the mic over.
Yeah.
Right.
And knowing too that, again, that intersectionality, right? Because you might have power on one with whiteness and not so much have it for being a female, and also noticing what the context that brings in. Because sometimes you may feel very disenfranchised on one identity, and that can make us feel like we have nothing. But when I say don't waste power, it's like, oh, but you may have power in this other way, really looking at it. And sometimes even just doing a power analysis on yourself of like, what spaces do I inhabit the most? Because in the therapy space, it is predominantly women, white women. And so if you're in that space a lot, that lack of power as a female may not come up as much. Simply by being there. And so it's like, yeah, I could still be actually quite powerful because of the context that I am, and how am I using that?
Right. Well, like even IFS trainings, for instance, you and I are both do a lot of work in that realm. Being a female in that space is the dominant gender, always. Right. So yeah, we forget that there we are in a very strong position of power. And how that impacts and influences. I'm really cognizant of time, Fatimah, and obviously Meghan, if you have anything else to say, but I'm wondering, Fatimah, what if anything feels really important for your system to externalize, for our listeners to hear? If there's any last bit that feels critical.
Yeah, I think the piece that I said about power and privilege, and to give yourself time and find a community where you can be honest. Like, there's a lot that can happen when we stop telling lies to ourselves, when we are not dominated by the parts that are afraid to really look clearly in the mirror, and getting with people who will hold you accountable with love. Because people who are just going to caretake you and just want you to feel good or want you to do that, it feels good for some parts, but it's not going to put you on the path of revolution that you think you're on. It's really just going to keep you comfortable versus safely uncomfortable in that space of learning, in that space of growth. And so I would say, take time with yourself and find community that's really going to, sharpen you. Iron sharpens iron. Yeah.
Damn. Honestly, I just appreciate being able to hold space with you today, Fatimah. That was really like a very powerful conversation, and I appreciate you being willing and open and honest to have it, right? You kind of are a lifelong learner. It says it right on your website, and you really do embody that with the openness and spaciousness that you're willing to kind of have the conversation, the hard conversations, the realistic and real and, very needed conversation here today. So I really appreciate it. I want to give you a moment here. I know that you have a new project that launched, and then I want to give you a moment to sort of plug any other places that our listeners can find you. I know you were on IFS Talks. I was actually looking at the date, and this episode is going to come out exactly a year from your last one. So I'm going to make sure to link that in the bio as well. But where can our listeners find you? And if you want to kind of plug some recent things you've been working on as well.
Yeah, you can find me. I'm on LinkedIn, my first and my last name. I'm also on Instagram, Fatimah Finney, LMHC. And yeah, we can stay in touch via those two platforms. In terms of the project, so the Altogether Us is a book that came out. Jenna Ramirezma is the editor of it. And I feel like it's just going to be like an IFS reference book. It is there's so much in there. And I have a chapter in that book on embodying the IFS model with Black clients, but it has a whole section on intersectionality. So you have chapters on IFS and working with Asian clients, IFS in play therapy, IFS in its integration with EMDR. It's just like all things IFS with all of these different ways to use it in different contexts. So I have a chapter in that. And I am also part of Thomas Hubel, who is another kind of collective healing person in the world, does the annual Collective Trauma Summit. And I'm a part of that. It's a free summit. You can sign up for it. Or I can share the link that people can sign up for with you all if you put that in the notes. But I have a conversation with Thomas and Richard Schwartz on legacy burdens as a part of that summit. And it is all videos that you get distributed to you at different times. It's going to be at the end of September, I believe, September through October. It'll just be this week of hearing talks from people from all walks of life, poets, artists, therapists, activists, talking about how do we, collectively heal the trauma that we oftentimes are collectively experiencing. So I'm looking forward to that.
Tons going on. I'll make sure to link everything that I can in the show notes so everybody can have quick access to follow, buy the book, etc., etc. The Turning In podcast also has a shared Spotify playlist. So Fatimah, is there any songs that your system has just been absolutely loving and dreaming of recently that we can add to our collective playlist?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We're talking about the history of this country. I absolutely love the Hamilton soundtrack. And so I don't know if you've seen that play, but it's a masterpiece to my system when I saw it. But there's a song on there called My Shot, or I'm Not Gonna Miss My Shot. That would be the one that I add to it. It's kind of like like a song that's on my gym playlist. And like when I need to like get in a zone to do something, I listened to it before I came on with you all. So that would be the song that I would add to the playlist.
We will get it on there immediately. I'm really excited to check it out.
I thought you were going to say I Want to Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston.
Well, that's my training. I do that song at least once in the training just to kind of get my thing out. I mean, you can do both. I love that one.
Well, I was going to say, you're not limited to just the one, so we can absolutely add both.
That was a part of me acting like an insider with Fatimah. Like,
But I literally played at least once in every training moment. Message to DJ. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Like I said in the very beginning, and we were kind of chatting about, this was sort of like a months long exciting thing on the schedule, and so really, really, truly appreciate you making time in your busy schedule for us and our listeners. Everybody, I hope that you enjoyed that episode and learned something. Make sure to check out all of Fatimah's details in the show notes and listen to her jams on our Spotify playlist along with everything else. Fatimah Finney, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.